please. He's coming. We have to pretend. Just like before. The whisper was a ghost of a sound, but it hit Jun Huk harder than a bullet. 6 months ago, those words were a plea to a stranger in a crowded cafe. Today they were a warning to a father. They thought I had grown soft. They thought a navy suit and a morning school run had turned the dragon into a sheep. They saw 2 children and mistook them for my weakness, a way to lure me back into the shadows. What the Iron Lotus didn't realize is that they hadn't found my weakness. They had found my fuse. A father will turn the whole world to ash before he lets his children learn what fear tastes like. Before we continue, I'm curious. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Tell me in the comments. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy emotional, cinematic stories like this, take a moment to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because tonight's story isn't just about what happened, it's about what should have never happened in the first place. Now, let's begin. The morning sun over Seoul always seemed to hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse with a surgical, unforgiving precision. It was a light that was meant to expose flaws, but in this house, everything was curated to look perfect. 6 months had passed since the courthouse gave Jun Huk the legal right to call Zara and Zion his own. And in those 6 months, the man once known as the Dragon had become a master of the mundane. He stood in the kitchen, the scent of expensive dark roast coffee mingling with the sweet, buttery aroma of pancakes. A domestic alchemy he had practiced until it felt natural. He wore a soft cashmere sweater, a far cry from the tactical layers of his former life. But as he flipped a pancake for Zion, his eyes never truly left the reflection in the polished chrome of the refrigerator. He wasn't checking his hair. He was watching the shadow of a man standing just outside the balcony glass. Min-ho, his head of security, giving a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. Another morning, another intercepted package at the front gate. Jun Huk's life had become a golden cage. It was a beautiful, sun-drenched prison where the bars were made of school schedules, ballet recitals, and the constant, crushing weight of a secret he couldn't share with the woman currently laughing in the hallway. Amara Cole walked into the kitchen, her hair still slightly damp from the shower, looking every bit the woman Jun Huk had dreamed of during those 8 hollow years of solitude. She leaned against the counter, watching him with a smile that reached her eyes. A smile that Jun Huk felt he had to protect at any cost, even the cost of his own soul. To her, he was the man who had stepped out of the shadows to save her daughters. To her, the danger was over, buried under the legal ruins of Derek Lawson's empire. She didn't see the way Jun Huk's phone buzzed with encrypted messages every 20 minutes. She didn't see the silent war being fought in the perimeter of their lives. "You're brooding again, Jun Huk?" Amara said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. Her touch was warm, but it sent a jolt of cold electricity through him. Every time she touched him, he was reminded of how fragile this peace was. He forced a smile, the kind of polished, practiced expression he had used to navigate boardrooms and back alleys alike. "Just thinking about the board meeting this afternoon," he lied, the words tasting like ash. "The merger is proving to be more stubborn than I anticipated." It was a half-truth. There was a merger happening, but it involved the consolidation of 3 rival street gangs under the banner of the Iron Lotus, not a corporate acquisition. The twins burst into the room then, a whirlwind of braided hair and school uniforms, their laughter filling the quiet spaces of the penthouse. Zara and Zion were the light of his life, but they were also his greatest vulnerability, and every time they hugged him, Jun Huk felt the heavy silver weight of the dragon pendant beneath his sweater pressing against his chest, a constant reminder of who he really was. "Appa, Zion hid my shoes again," Zara complained, though her eyes were sparkling with mischief. Jun Huk knelt down, eye level with the girls, and for a moment, the predator inside him went quiet. He was just a father. He adjusted Zara's collar, his fingers lingering for a second too long as he scanned the room, his instinctual radar constantly pinging for threats. After the girls were bundled off to the private school car, a vehicle that looked like a standard luxury sedan but was armored to withstand a small-scale military assault, Jun Huk's demeanor shifted. The warmth in his eyes didn't vanish, but it was pulled back behind a veil of cold, calculating iron. He stepped onto the balcony where Minho was waiting. The air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of Seoul's morning traffic. Minho didn't wait for a greeting. He handed Jun Huk a tablet. On the screen was a photo of a small, dried black lotus flower left on the windshield of Jun Huk's personal car in the secure basement. They breached the lower level at 3 a.m., Minho reported, his voice low and devoid of emotion. We caught the courier on the thermal feed, but he was gone before we could lock down the elevators. He didn't take anything. He just left the mark. Jun Huk looked at the black lotus, the symbol of Madame Gao's syndicate. It was a taunt, a reminder that no matter how many security teams he hired, no matter how much money he poured into normalcy, he was still marked by the underworld. The Iron Lotus believed that because he had a family, he had grown soft. They saw the wealthy man of business and thought the dragon had been declawed. Increase the perimeter to 3 miles, Jun Huk commanded, his voice a low vibration that made the glass of the balcony railing hum. I want eyes on every rooftop overlooking the school. If a bird flies too close to the girls, I want to know its wingspan. He handed the tablet back, his mind already 3 steps ahead, calculating the logistics of a war he was desperately trying to avoid. He had spent months cleaning up the mess Derek Lawson had left behind, but the Iron Lotus was a different kind of beast. They weren't obsessed ex-fiancés. They were professional killers who saw his retirement as an insult to the hierarchy they served. Throughout the day, Jun Huk moved through his corporate office like a ghost. He sat through meetings, signed contracts, and shook hands with men who had no idea they were sitting across from a legendary hitman. His office was a fortress of glass and steel, but to him it felt like a target. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart did a singular, violent thud against his ribs. It was always a security update. Asterisk perimeter clear. Target A in class. Target B in music room. Asterisk he was a man obsessed with control because he knew that in his world, the moment you lost control was the moment you lost everything. At lunch, he met Amara at a small, quiet bistro near the girls' school. It was meant to be a romantic break, a chance to be normal for an hour. But as Amara talked about the charity gala she was organizing, Jun Huk's eyes were constantly moving. He watched the waiter's hands. He watched the black SUV parked across the street. He watched the way the sunlight glinted off the windows of the building opposite them. He was a man living in 2 worlds simultaneously, and the strain was beginning to show in the fine lines around his eyes. Jun Huk, you're not here with me, Amara said, her voice tinged with a worry that she tried to hide. She reached across the table and took his hand. Is it Derek? Did he find a way to appeal? Is that why you're so tense? Jun Huk squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing the soft skin of her knuckles. He hated the lies. He hated that he couldn't tell her that Derek Lawson was the least of their worries. He couldn't tell her that there was a woman named Madame Gao who wanted to see him bleed just to prove a point. Derek is gone, Amara. I promise you. I'm just tired. The transition to the new company has been more taxing than I thought. Maybe we should take a trip, she suggested, her eyes lighting up with hope. Just the 4 of us. Somewhere quiet. No phones, no board meetings. Just a family. The irony hit him like a physical blow. A trip would be a tactical nightmare. Moving the twins and Amara out of his fortified golden cage would be like serving them on a silver platter to the Iron Lotus. Soon, he promised, the word a heavy lie that hung in the air between them. Once the merger is finalized, I'll take you anywhere you want to go. As they left the bistro, Jun Huk felt a prickle at the back of his neck, the instinct that had kept him alive for 20 years in the syndicate wars. He scanned the crowd, his eyes narrowing. There, in the reflection of a shop window, he saw a man in a slate-gray coat, watching them. The man didn't look like a common thief. He had the professional posture of a cleaner. Jun Huk didn't react. He didn't reach for the weapon he had hidden beneath his blazer. Instead, he simply tucked Amara under his arm and walked faster toward the car, his mind already identifying the threat and filing it away for disposal. Back at the office, Jun Huk called Minho, the man in the gray coat at the bistro. Find him. I want to know who he reports to by sunset. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of high-stakes anxiety masked by professional calm. He picked the girls up from school himself, his eyes scanning the parents and teachers for any sign of a breach. He watched Zara and Zion run toward him, their faces lighting up with joy, and for a fleeting second, he felt the weight of his golden cage lift. But then he saw it. A small, black lotus drawn in chalk on the sidewalk where the girls had been playing. It was a message. They were close. They were touching his life and they weren't afraid. That evening, as he tucked the girls into bed, Zion looked up at him with those wide, intuitive eyes that always seemed to see too much. "Appa, why are you wearing your dragon necklace outside your shirt today?" she asked, her voice small and sleepy. Jun Huk looked down. In his haste to get them home, the heavy silver pendant had slipped out from under his sweater. He quickly tucked it back in, his heart rate spiking. "It's just a lucky charm, Zion," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "Go to sleep. I'll be right outside." As he stepped out of their room and closed the door, he found Amara standing in the hallway, her arms crossed. She had seen the exchange. She had seen the pendant. And for the first time in 6 months, he saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the realization that the man she loved was still keeping a part of himself in the dark. "Jun Huk," she started. But he cut her off with a kiss that was desperate and full of unsaid apologies. He held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest, a rhythm he was prepared to defend with his life. He was a lion in a suit, a dragon in a penthouse, and as the storm clouds gathered over the Seoul skyline, he knew the cage was about to break. The Iron Lotus thought they had found his weakness, but as he looked out over the city he once ruled, his eyes turned a predatory, glowing amber. They hadn't found his weakness. They had found his fuse. And tomorrow, at the piano recital, the world would finally learn that a lion is always a lion. The transition from the world of blood to the world of law had been expensive, both in currency and in the thinning of Jun Huk's conscience. To become a ghost, he had relied on a network of high-priced legal architects, men who specialized in moving assets through shadows and turning a legendary assassin into a legitimate venture capitalist. For 6 months, these men had been his lifeline to the surface world. But as the rain began to lash against the glass of his office on the 50th floor, Jun Huk realized that the line between his past and present was not a wall, but a veil, and someone was currently tearing it to shreds. The first crack in the foundation appeared at 2 p.m. Jun Huk was reviewing school tuition statements when his private line, a phone that only 5 people on Earth had the number to, vibrated on the mahogany desk. It was Park, his primary attorney and the man who had handled the twins' adoption papers. But it wasn't Park's voice on the other end. It was the sound of a heavy, wet thud, followed by the clinical, rhythmic ticking of a clock. Then, a woman's voice, silk-wrapped and dangerous, drifted through the speaker. "The dragon has spent so much time pretending to be a man of papers that he's forgotten what happens when the paper catches fire." The line went dead. Jun Huk didn't panic. Panic was a luxury for those who hadn't seen death in the mirror every morning. Instead, he felt a familiar, cold machinery click into place behind his eyes. He stood up, his navy suit jacket feeling like a suit of armor as he walked toward the door. He didn't tell his secretary he was leaving. He didn't check his schedule. He signaled Min-ho with a sharp gesture, and within seconds, they were descending toward the parking garage in a private elevator that moved with the same silent, predatory grace as its owner. The scene at Park's law firm was a study in psychological warfare. The office, located in the heart of the Gangnam district, was a place of marble and hushed whispers. But the air now smelled of ozone and something sickly sweet, the scent of white lilies. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass or shell casings. But when Jun Huk pushed open the double doors to Park's private office, he found the man who had secured his daughter's future slumped over his desk. Park wasn't dead, but he had been professionally dismantled. His tongue had been removed with surgical precision, placed inside a small, ornate glass box on top of the twins' adoption file. Beside it lay a single, dried black lotus flower. "They didn't kill him," Min-ho whispered, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "They wanted him to live through the silence." Jun Huk looked at the lotus, his amber eyes narrowing until they were mere slits of golden fire. He knew this handiwork. This wasn't the clumsy brutality of Derek Lawson's hired thugs or the desperate grab of a street gang. This was the work of the Iron Lotus, a syndicate that operated with the discipline of a military unit and the cruelty of a cult. More importantly, he knew the woman who led them, Madame Gao. She was a relic from a time before the ghost. A woman whose heart was as cold as the Siberian winters where they had once trained together. She wasn't just an enemy. She was a reminder of the man he used to be. A man who had once been her equal in the dark. As they exited the building, Jun Huk's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an image. It was his second legal associate, a man who managed his offshore holdings, sitting in a park in Seoul. He appeared to be sleeping on a bench, but a black lotus was pinned to his lapel, and his hands had been shattered. The message was clear. Everyone who had helped the dragon build his golden cage was being hunted. Gao wasn't just attacking his business. She was systematically destroying the pillars that kept his family's life legal and safe. She was forcing him back into the underworld by leaving him nowhere else to stand. Jun Huk felt a wave of nausea, not from the violence, but from the realization that his daughters were currently in a world that was becoming less safe by the second. He called Amara, his voice a masterclass in controlled calm. Amara, honey, I've had a security breach at one of the firm's partner offices. It's nothing to worry about, but I'm sending an extra car for the girls' school run today. Stay inside the penthouse. Don't open the door for anyone but Min-ho. Jun Huk, you're scaring me. Amara's voice was thin, the echoes of her past trauma with Derek Lawson rising to the surface. Is this happening again? I thought we were safe. You are safe, Jun Huk lied, the words cutting his throat like glass. I am the wall between you and the world, Amara. Nothing gets through the wall. But even as he said it, he saw the man in the gray coat from the bistro standing across the street, holding a burner phone. The man didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply bowed, a deep, respectful bow to a fallen king, and walked into the shadows of a nearby alley. Jun Huk wanted to chase him, to wrap his hands around the man's throat until he gave up Gao's location. But he couldn't leave his post. He was a father now, and a father's first duty was to the perimeter. He spent the next 3 hours in the back of the armored SUV, his laptop screen a mosaic of surveillance feeds and encrypted data. He watched the Iron Lotus's movements like a strategist watching a game of chess. They were taking out his white knights, the lawyers, the accountants, the fixers who kept the Kong name clean. By the time the sun began to dip behind the skyscrapers, 4 of his associates had been neutralized. The Iron Lotus wasn't just a syndicate. They were a virus, and they were infecting every part of the life he had built for Amara and the twins. They think I'm soft, Min-ho, Jun Huk said, his voice dropping an octave into a register that made the driver's shoulders tense. They think the appa, who attends school plays and buys teddy bears, has forgotten how to speak the language of the lotus. What are your orders, sir? Min-ho asked. Call the shadow cabinet, Jun Huk commanded. Tell them the dragon is calling in every favor, every debt, and every drop of blood owed to the Kong name. I want every Iron Lotus front in this city identified by midnight. If they want to take away my peace, I will take away their existence. The Shadow Cabinet was a collection of men and women who had served Jun Huk before his retirement. People who had stayed in the dark when he tried to move into the light. They were his true legacy, the teeth he had kept hidden in the drawer. As the calls went out, Jun Huk felt the cashmere of his sweater beginning to feel like a shroud. He looked at the dragon pendant in the rearview mirror. It seemed to pulse with a cold light. He returned to the penthouse just as the girls were finishing their dinner. The air in the house was thick with the scent of Amara's jasmine perfume, a scent that usually calmed him but now felt like an invitation to a funeral. He hugged Zara and Zion, his nose pressing into their hair, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. He felt like a monster pretending to be a man. Every time they laughed, he heard the wet thud of Park's tongue hitting the glass box. Every time Amara looked at him with love, he saw the black lotus pinned to a dead man's heart. You're late for the piano practice, Zion pouted, tugging at his hand. You promised you'd listen to my new piece. I'm here now, little star, Jun Huk whispered, sitting on the bench beside her. He watched her small, delicate fingers move across the ivory keys. The music was beautiful, a fragile melody that seemed to defy the darkness gathering outside the windows. But as he looked at her hands, he didn't see a pianist. He saw the legacy Gao wanted to steal. He saw the weakness the Iron Lotus wanted to exploit. He stayed there for hours, a lion guarding a den that was already being circled by wolves. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark of his study, watching the city lights flicker like dying stars. He knew the recital tomorrow was the trap. Gao wouldn't come for him in his fortress. She would come for him in the one place where he had to be, Appa. She would force him to choose between his girl's safety and his own soul. As the first light of dawn began to gray the sky, Jun Huk opened a hidden safe in the floor of his study. Inside was a single, matte black Glock and a silencer. He didn't want to touch it. He wanted to leave it in the dark forever. But as he looked at the photo of the twins on his desk, his eyes turned that terrifying, predatory amber. Gao was right. The dragon had grown fond of the light. And that was exactly why he was going to make sure the Iron Lotus never saw the sun again. The Grand Seoul Arts Center was a monument to high culture, a temple of glass and marble designed to host the softest parts of human existence. It was a place where the air smelled of floor wax and expensive lilies, and where the only tension was supposed to be the nervous fluttering of a child's heart before their first solo. Jun Huk sat in the fourth row, his navy suit tailored to perfection, his posture upright and attentive. To the parents sitting around him, he was a successful businessman, perhaps a bit stern in the jawline, but clearly a devoted father. He held a gold-trimmed program in hands that didn't shake, despite the fact that every nerve ending in his body was screaming a warning. Beside him, Amara looked radiant, her hand resting on his knee, her eyes fixed on the stage with a mother's pride. She believed this was a victory, a moment of pure normalcy that proved they had finally escaped the shadow of the dragon. Jun Huk knew better. He had felt the eyes the moment they stepped out of the armored SUV. He had seen the way the ushers at the back of the hall moved with a weight in their gait that suggested concealed steel rather than programs. He had counted 12 of them. 12 professionals, dressed in slate gray, moving with the silent, synchronized grace of the Iron Lotus. They were Madame Gao's men, and they were here to watch him perform his most difficult role yet, the helpless witness. The lights in the auditorium began to dim, casting the audience into a velvet darkness. On stage, a spotlight illuminated the grand piano, where Zara and Zion stood together, bowing to polite applause. They looked like porcelain dolls in their white lace dresses, their hair braided with silk ribbons. Jun Huk felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his chest, a mixture of profound love and a terrifying cold dread. He looked at Zion as she sat at the bench, her small fingers poised over the ivory keys. In that moment, she looked up into the darkness of the crowd, her eyes searching for him. When she found him, she didn't smile. She leaned forward, her lips barely moving, as if she were speaking to the air itself. Through the silence of the hall, the words reached him, a ghost of a sound that hit him harder than any bullet ever could. Appa, please. He's coming. We have to pretend. Just like before. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. 6 months ago, those words were a plea to a stranger in a rain-slicked cafe. Today, they were a death warrant. Jun Huk's fingers tightened on the program until the gold foil crinkled and tore. He didn't turn his head. He didn't reach for the weapon he had strapped to the small of his back. He stayed perfectly still, even as he saw the shadow of a man in a gray coat step onto the side of the stage. The man wasn't hiding. He was holding a single, thorned black lotus. He placed it on the edge of the piano, right next to Zion's trembling hands, and then he looked directly at Jun Huk. Then the lights went out. It wasn't a flicker or a blown fuse. It was a surgical kill of the building's power grid. The darkness was absolute, heavy and suffocating. In the split second of silence before the screaming began, Jun Huk heard the sound of a heavy velvet curtain being drawn and the muffled scuffle of small feet being dragged toward the wings. Amara's voice rose in a sharp, panicked cry. Jun Huk, the girls. Where are the girls? Stay down. Jun Huk's voice was no longer that of the businessman. It was a low, guttural command that brooked no argument. He shoved Amara toward the floor, shielding her body with his own as the auditorium erupted into chaos. Flashlights cut through the dark, not the beams of emergency lights, but the tactical strobes of the Iron Lotus. Screams of other parents filled the air, but Jun Huk was deaf to them. He was a machine now, a predator that had been dormant for too long, finally feeling the snap of the leash. He moved through the crowd like a shadow given form. He didn't need light. He knew the geometry of the room, the distance to the stage, and the frequency of the threats. A man in gray intercepted him in the aisle, the glint of a combat knife catching a stray beam of light. Jun Huk didn't slow down. He caught the man's wrist, the sound of bones snapping like a dry twig echoing through the row, and drove his palm into the man's throat. It was a silent, mechanical kill. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel fear. He only felt the fuse burning shorter and shorter. By the time he reached the stage, the twins were gone. The side exit was hanging open, the cold night air of Seoul rushing in to meet the heat of the panicked hall. On the floor lay a single white silk ribbon from Zion's hair, trampled by a heavy boot. Jun Huk picked it up, his knuckles turning white as he wrapped the fabric around his palm. He looked out into the darkness of the stage wings and saw the man with the scarred lip, the one who had left the Lotus. The man was standing by the loading dock, a burner phone in his hand. "The dragon has grown old," the man said, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the empty stage. "Madame Gao was right. You've traded your fire for a seat in the front row. You want the legacy? Come to the mountain. Bring the deeds to the Incheon docks, or the twins start to learn the language of the Lotus tonight." The man stepped back into a waiting van, the doors slamming shut with a finality that felt like a tomb. Jun Huk stood on the edge of the stage, the light from the street lamps outside catching the amber fire in his eyes. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't shaking. He was a god of war standing in a temple of peace, and he was realizing that the Iron Lotus had made a fatal mistake. They thought that by taking the children, they had taken his strength. They didn't realize they had removed his only reason to be merciful. Amara reached the stage, her face streaked with tears, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with a terror that threatened to break her. "They took them, Jun Huk. They took my babies. Do something. Please, do something." Jun Huk looked at her, and for a second, the amber in his eyes softened back into the man she loved. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I'm going to bring them home, Amara. I promise you. But you need to listen to me. The man you've known for the last 6 months. He has to go away for a little while." "I don't care who you have to be," she sobbed, clutching his suit jacket. "Just get them back." "I will," he whispered. "But when I come back, I might look a little different." He turned away from her and walked toward the back of the stage, shedding his navy suit jacket as he moved. He pulled a burner phone from a hidden pocket and dialed a number he hadn't touched in nearly a decade. It was answered on the first ring. No one spoke. They waited for the dragon to speak first. "This is Kong Jun Huk," he said, his voice vibrating with a cold, lethal intent. "Activate the shadow cabinet. Lock down the Incheon corridor. I want every Iron Lotus front burned to the ground by sunrise. If a man breathes for Madame Gao, I want his lungs collapsed. I'm coming for my daughters, and I'm bringing the fire with me." He stepped out into the night, the rain beginning to fall in heavy, rhythmic sheets. He didn't go to his car. He went to a nondescript black motorcycle parked 3 blocks away, a vehicle that didn't exist on any legal registry. He pulled a matte black helmet over his head, the amber of his eyes visible behind the visor for a split second before it snapped shut. The Iron Lotus believed that a father was a man with something to lose. They believed that love made a man vulnerable, that it made him hesitate, that it made him weak. They saw a soft businessman who spent his weekends at piano recitals and school runs. They were about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. The guards inside didn't even have time to draw their weapons. Jun Huk moved through them like a scythe through wheat. He didn't use a gun. He used his hands, his elbows, and the environment around him. He was a whirlwind of amber-eyed destruction, leaving a trail of broken bodies in his wake. He found the manager in the back office, a man who had once been a low-level associate of Jun Huk's rival. "Where are they?" Jun Huk asked, his voice a low, terrifying rasp as he pinned the man to the wall by his throat. I don't know. Gao didn't tell us. The man wheezed, his eyes bulging with terror. Jun Huk leaned in close, his face inches from the man's. You have 5 seconds to remember. Or I'll show you why they used to call me the dragon. The old textile mill. In Incheon. They're taking them to the docks. Jun Huk dropped him. He didn't kill him. He needed the man to spread the word. He needed the underworld to know that the dragon was awake, and he was hungry. He walked back through the wreckage of the bar, the smell of smoke and ozone following him like a cape. He got back on the motorcycle and vanished into the rain, heading toward the coast. In the back of the van speeding toward Incheon, Zara and Zion sat huddled together, their lace dresses torn, their faces smudged with dirt. Zion reached out and squeezed Zara's hand, her eyes fixed on the man with the scarred lip. She didn't cry. She remembered the games her father had taught her. She remembered the way he looked at her when he told her she was a little star. He's coming? Zion whispered, her voice steady and full of a strange, chilling certainty. The man with the scarred lip laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Your daddy is a businessman, kid. He's probably calling his lawyers right now. Zion looked at him, and for a split second, her eyes seemed to catch a glint of the same amber fire that lived in her father's. My appa isn't a businessman, she said. He's the dragon, and he's going to burn you all to ash. The man stopped laughing. He looked at the girl, and for the first time he felt a prickle of genuine fear. He looked out the back window of the van, half expecting to see a monster rising from the asphalt. He didn't see anything but the rain and the dark. But in the distance, he heard it. The low, predatory roar of a high-powered engine, cutting through the storm like a scream of vengeance. The Iron Lotus had wanted the dragon. They had wanted the power, the territory, and the legacy. They had wanted to prove that love was a weakness. They were about to find out that they were wrong. Love wasn't the dragon's weakness. It was his fuel. And tonight, Seoul was going to learn what happens when a father decides that the world is no longer worth saving unless his children are in it. The hunt had begun. And Jun Huk was no longer pretending to be anyone's dad. He was the only thing that stood between his daughters and the dark, and he was prepared to become the dark itself to bring them home. The transition from the velvet-lined seats of the Seoul Arts Center to the jagged, cold reality of the Incheon docks was not a journey across geography, but a descent back into a soul that Jun Huk had tried to bury under a mountain of school runs and Sunday brunches. As he accelerated the black motorcycle through the industrial veins of the city, the rain didn't feel like a nuisance. It felt like a baptism. The expensive cashmere of his sweater was soaked through, clinging to his frame like a second skin, and the wind whipped against his visor with the fury of 1,000 ghosts. But inside the helmet, Jun Huk was a vacuum of silence. The frantic, terrified father who had watched his children vanish into the dark was gone. In his place was the dragon, and the dragon was finally breathing. He reached a secluded overlook beneath the shadow of the Incheon Bridge, the massive concrete pylons rising like the legs of a forgotten god. He killed the engine, the silence that followed more deafening than the roar of the bike. He pulled off his helmet, his hair plastered to his forehead, and looked out over the harbor where the Iron Lotus operated their smuggling routes. His eyes weren't just amber now. They were incandescent, reflecting the harsh orange glow of the sodium lamps. He pulled a second phone from a hidden compartment in the bike. Not the burner he used for business, but a device that looked like a rugged military brick. It hadn't been powered on in 5 years. As the screen flickered to life, it backlit his face with a ghostly blue hue. He didn't scroll through a contact list. He entered a code that bypassed every satellite relay in the country. This was the Dragon's Bell, a signal that reached the Shadow Cabinet, the men and women who had built the Kong Empire out of bone and shadow, and who had remained in the dark, waiting for the king to reclaim his throne. The first to answer was Elder Kim, a man who had been Jun Huk's mentor and the architect of his original rise. His voice was like grinding stones. The dragon is awake. The lotus has touched my blood, Jun Huk replied, his voice a low, terrifying rasp that carried no emotion, only the weight of an inevitable conclusion. Madame Gao has the twins. She thinks she can use them to buy the Incheon corridor. She thinks I've grown soft in the light. She is a fool, Kim whispered. What do you require? Everything, Jun Huk commanded. I want a total lockdown of the city's exit points. I want the ports frozen. I want the shadow cabinet in the streets. If a car moves toward the border, I want it dismantled. If a man mentions the name Gao, I want his tongue silenced. And I want the armory at the old silk factory opened. I'm going in heavy. It will be done, Kim said. The cabinet has been restless, Jun Huk. They didn't like the suit you were wearing. They will be glad to see the scales again. Within 10 minutes of that call, the invisible gears of Seoul began to grind to a halt. In the high-end nightclubs of Gangnam, music suddenly stopped as managers received single-word texts. In the shipping yards, cranes ceased their rhythmic swinging as foremen walked off the job, eyes turning toward the north. The city's digital infrastructure began to pulse with a localized virus that scrambled the GPS of every vehicle registered to the Iron Lotus. The shadow cabinet wasn't a gang. It was the hidden nervous system of the city, and Jun Huk had just sent a shock of pure adrenaline through it. Jun Huk arrived at the silk factory, a decaying relic of Seoul's industrial past, just as 3 black SUVs pulled into the courtyard. The men who stepped out didn't look like the modern, polished cleaners of the Iron Lotus. They were older, scarred, and wore the heavy, dark overcoats of the old guard. They bowed deeply as Jun Huk approached, a silent acknowledgement of a power they feared and respected more than any law. Sir, one of them said, stepping forward to open a heavy steel door. The cabinet has secured the perimeter of the Incheon textile mill. Madame Gao is inside. She has 30 men. They are expecting a negotiation. They are expecting the businessman. Jun Huk walked past him into the dimly lit factory floor. The air smelled of gun oil and old stone. On a central table lay a collection of equipment that looked more like the kit of a special forces operator than a civilian. There were ceramic plates for a tactical vest, a matte black suppressed submachine gun, and several custom-made blades. As Jun Huk began to dress, the transition became physical. He shed the soaked cashmere, exposing the corded muscle and the intricate, faded ink of a dragon that wrapped around his torso. A dragon whose tail ended at his wrist and whose head rested over his heart. He strapped on the tactical vest, the weight of it a familiar comfort. He checked the action on the Glock, the metallic clack-clack of the slide, the only music he needed. He wasn't pretending anymore. The suit was gone. The businessman was dead. The father remained, but he was now wearing the skin of a monster. Elder Kim reports that the Iron Lotus has blocked the main bridge, the guard informed him. They've set up a kill zone. They think you're coming in a motorcade. Jun Huk looked at himself in a cracked mirror on the wall. He saw the amber glow in his eyes, the cold precision of his movements. He remembered the way Zion had looked at him in the theater, the way she had told the kidnappers he was the dragon. She had known. Even in her innocence, she had sensed the fire inside him. They're thinking like gangsters, Jun Huk said, his voice dropping into a register that made the men around him shift uncomfortably. They think this is about territory. They think I want to save my reputation. They don't understand that I'm not here to win. I'm here to erase. He took a final piece of equipment from the table, a silver dragon pendant, identical to the one he wore every day, but this one was fitted with a high-frequency transmitter. He tucked it into a pocket. He thought of Amara, standing alone in the theater holding a silk ribbon. He knew that after tonight, the man she loved might never be able to look her in the eye again. He knew that by calling in the shadow cabinet, he was burning the bridge back to his normal life. But as he gripped the handle of his weapon, he realized that a normal life was a luxury for men who didn't have daughters like his. Deploy the cabinet to the secondary docks, Jun Huk ordered. Tell them to cut the power to the entire district on my signal. I want the Lotus fighting in the dark. That's where they'll realize they've walked into a lair, not a meeting. He stepped out of the factory, the rain still relentless, the SUVs waiting with their engines idling like the low growl of a beast. He didn't get into the car. He got back on the motorcycle. He wanted the wind. He wanted the cold. He wanted every sensory input to remind him of the stakes. The ride to the textile mill was a blur of neon and concrete. Around him, the city felt different. He could sense the shadow cabinet at work, the way certain streetlights flickered out as he passed, the way a delivery truck, accidentally, stalled to block a police cruiser from entering the district. The city was working for him now, a living, breathing extension of his will. As he neared the textile mill, a massive, rusted structure that loomed over the black waters of the harbor, he saw the Iron Lotus sentries. They were positioned on the roof, their silhouettes sharp against the gray sky. They were looking for a billionaire's sedan. They were looking for a man who would come with a briefcase and a plea for mercy. Jun Huk didn't slow down. He killed his headlights a mile out and used the infrared goggles integrated into his helmet. The world turned a ghostly digital green. He saw the heat signatures of the guards. He saw the snipers in the bell tower. He saw the heartbeat of the building itself. He reached the perimeter fence, a chain-link barrier topped with concertina wire. He moved through the shadows of the yard, his feet making no sound on the wet gravel. He was a ghost again. But this time, he wasn't hiding from the world. He was haunting it. He reached the first guard, a man smoking a cigarette near a stack of shipping crates. Before the man could even register the shift in the air, Jun Huk was behind him. A hand over the mouth, a blade between the ribs. The man went limp, his cigarette falling into a puddle with a soft hiss. 1 down, 29 to go. He repeated the process with surgical efficiency. 2 guards by the loading dock. 1 in the stairwell. He didn't use his gun. The silence was his greatest ally. He wanted Madame Gao to feel the walls closing in. He wanted her to wonder why her radio checks were going unanswered. He wanted her to feel the specific type of terror that comes from knowing you've invited a dragon into your house and forgotten to bring enough water to put out the fire. He reached the 3rd floor, where the heat signatures of the twins were located. They were in a small, reinforced room at the back of the mill. Beside them were 3 guards and a woman, Gao. Jun Huk paused in the hallway, his back against the cold brick. He could hear their voices. "Your father is late, little stars." Gao's voice drifted through the door, sounding bored and sharp. Perhaps he decided that 2 daughters weren't worth the price of a kingdom. Men like him, they always choose the gold in the end. "You're wrong." Zion's voice was small, but it was steady. "He's already here. You just can't see him yet." Jun Huk felt a flare of pride so intense it almost broke his concentration. He reached for his radio and gave the signal to Elder Kim. Now, a mile away, the main power substation for the Incheon Industrial District exploded in a controlled sequence. The lights in the textile mill didn't just flicker. They died with a violent, final pop. The humming of the machinery, the buzz of the security monitors, the glow of the emergency exits. Everything vanished into a thick, impenetrable black. Inside the room, Jun Huk heard the guards scrambling, the metallic slide of weapons being readied, the sharp bark of Gao's commands. "Get the night vision. Secure the door. He's here." Jun Huk didn't wait for them to find their goggles. He kicked the door open, the sound like a thunderclap in the small space. He didn't fire blindly. He used the tactical light on his weapon, a strobe that pulsed at a frequency designed to disorient and blind the human eye. In the strobe light, he saw them. The guards were clutching their eyes, their shadows dancing wildly against the walls. Gao was retreating toward the back window, her face a mask of shock and fury. And there, huddled in the corner, were Zara and Zion. Jun Huk moved like a blur of mechanical precision. Pop pop. The first guard went down before he could raise his rifle. Pop pop. The second guard's head snapped back as he reached for a grenade. The third guard lunged at Jun Huk with a knife, but Jun Huk didn't even use his gun. He caught the man's arm, twisted it until the bones splintered through the skin, and drove his knee into the man's solar plexus with enough force to stop his heart. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the heavy, ragged breathing of the twins. Jun Huk stood in the center of the room, the strobe light off, his amber eyes the only source of light as they caught the distant glow of the city. He turned toward the girls. "Close your eyes, my stars," he whispered, his voice returning to the soft, gentle tone of the man who read them bedtime stories. "Appa is here. Don't look at the floor. Just come to me." Zara and Zion didn't hesitate. They sprinted across the room, past the bodies of the men who had tried to steal their lives, and threw themselves into Jun Huk's arms. He dropped his weapon, pulling them into a crushing embrace, his face buried in their hair. He could feel their hearts racing, their small bodies trembling with a mix of terror and relief. "We knew you'd come," Zion sobbed into his chest. "We told them." "I know you did," Jun Huk whispered, his eyes fixed on the open window where Madame Gao had vanished. He didn't chase her. Not yet. The shadow cabinet had the building surrounded. There was no escape from the city he had locked down. He picked up both girls, one in each arm, their weight the only thing that kept him grounded to the earth. He walked out of the room, stepping over the wreckage of the Iron Lotus, his head held high. He wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a ghost. He was a father who had called in the shadows to protect the light. As he reached the ground floor, he was met by Elder Kim and a dozen members of the shadow cabinet. They stood in a double line, their heads bowed in silence as the king walked past them with his legacy in his arms. "The mill is secure," Kim reported. "Madame Gao was intercepted at the pier. She is being held for your judgment." Jun Huk didn't look back. He walked toward his SUV, the rain washing the blood and soot from his face. "Keep her alive," he said, his voice echoing through the empty factory. "I want her to see the city burn before she leaves it. I want her to understand that the dragon didn't grow soft. He just found something worth burning the world for." He placed the twins in the back seat, wrapping them in heavy blankets, and watched as their eyes finally began to close, the exhaustion of the night finally catching up to them. He climbed into the driver's seat and looked at himself in the rearview mirror. The amber was still there, glowing in the dark, but it was no longer a fire of rage. It was a beacon. He put the car in gear and drove away from the docks, the shadow cabinet melting back into the darkness behind him. The city of Seoul was waking up, unaware that it had been held in a grip of iron for the last 4 hours. As the sun began to break through the clouds, Jun Huk drove toward home. He knew the golden cage was gone. He knew the secret was out. But as he listened to the steady, peaceful breathing of his daughters in the back seat, he realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't a ghost. He was home. The hum of the armored SUV's engine was the only sound in the pre-dawn stillness of the Seoul highway, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to ground Jun Huk as he navigated the path away from the smoke-choked Incheon docks. Behind him, the twins were cocooned in heavy wool blankets, their rhythmic breathing a miracle he still struggled to believe in. In the rearview mirror, he could see the silhouette of the textile mill receding into the gray mist, a tomb for the men who had mistaken a father's love for a fatal flaw. But as the adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by the cold, biting clarity of the morning, Jun Huk's mind didn't linger on the violence of the rescue. Instead, it drifted back to the quiet afternoons in their sun-drenched penthouse, to the games he had played with Zara and Zion while Amara watched from the kitchen, smiling at what she thought was a father simply bonding with his daughters. It had started only 3 weeks after the adoption papers were signed. Jun Huk had stood in the center of their expansive living room, watching the girls navigate the world with a terrifying, beautiful innocence. He saw the way they walked through open spaces without checking their flanks. He saw the way they trusted the locks on the doors. He saw the way they believed that the world was a place that fundamentally wanted them to be safe. It was a perspective he envied, but it was a perspective he knew was a death sentence in the world that trailed behind him like a persistent shadow. He couldn't teach them to shoot, and he couldn't show them how to break a throat with a single palm strike, not without shattering the very childhood he was trying to preserve. So he had innovated. He had turned survival into a playground. "The floor is lava," he had called it. That was the first lesson. To Amara, it looked like a classic childhood game where the girls hopped from rug to ottoman to avoid touching the hardwood. But to Jun Huk, it was a lesson in spatial awareness and route optimization. He would sit in his armchair, a stopwatch in his hand, his amber eyes tracking their movements with a focus that bordered on the obsessive. 22 seconds, he would say, his voice warm but containing an edge of instruction. "Zara, you hesitated near the window. In the lava world, the heat is strongest near the glass. You must find the path that keeps you in the center of the room. Always look for the blind spot where the lava can't see you." He wasn't teaching them to avoid heat. He was teaching them to avoid lines of sight from external snipers. He was teaching them to move through a room without ever crossing the direct path of a window. By the third month, the twins could navigate the entire 3,000-square-foot penthouse without ever being visible from the neighboring skyscrapers. They thought they were winning a game. Jun Huk knew they were learning to stay alive in a world of glass and steel. Then there was the secret signal game. This was the one that had saved them in the textile mill. Jun Huk had bought them 2 identical silver dragon pendants. Smaller, delicate versions of the heavy one he wore over his own heart. He told them they were magic charms that allowed them to talk to him even when he wasn't there. If the world ever gets too loud, he had told them one evening, sitting on the edge of Zion's bed. Or if the lights go out and you feel the shadow men coming, you press the dragon's eye 3 times. That sends a magic spark to Appa's phone. And then you play the ghost game. The ghost game was the most critical part of their training. It was a series of breathing exercises and sensory deprivation drills disguised as a high-stakes version of hide and seek. He taught them how to slow their heart rates by counting the beats of a dragon's wing. He taught them how to find the smallest, darkest corners of a room and melt into the architecture. A ghost doesn't cry, he had whispered during one of their sessions in the darkened pantry. A ghost doesn't breathe loud. A ghost waits for the sun to come back. If you are a good ghost, the shadow men will walk right past you, because you are part of the wall. As he drove, Jun Huk remembered the day he had taken them to the park to practice the butterfly hunt. It looked like a typical family outing, but Jun Huk had spent the morning secretly planting 3 of his security team members in civilian clothes throughout the gardens. Today, he told the girls, we are hunting the silver butterflies. They look like regular people, but they are wearing a silver pin on their collars. Your job is to spot them before they spot you. If you see one, you don't point. You don't yell. You just walk to the nearest safe tree and wait for me. He watched from a distance as Zara and Zion moved through the crowded park. Their eyes, once wandering and distracted, were now sharp, darting from face to face, scanning lapels and necklines with a mechanical efficiency that made Jun Huk both proud and profoundly sad. They were only 7, yet they were developing the amber sight, the ability to differentiate between a civilian and a threat. When Zion spotted the first guard near the fountain, she didn't panic. She simply took Zara's hand and veered toward a large oak tree, her movements fluid and purposeful. They had won the game, and Jun Huk had rewarded them with ice cream. But as he watched them eat, he realized he was building a wall between them and the rest of humanity. He was making them like him. The most difficult training, however, had been the pretend game. It was the game that had formed the very basis of their first encounter in the cafe. Jun Huk had taught them that sometimes the best way to hide was in plain sight, by becoming someone else. If a stranger ever tries to take you, he had coached them, you find the strongest man in the room. You look for the man with the quietest hands. And you tell him a story. You tell him he is your father. You make the world believe the lie, and the lie will become your shield. He had practiced this with them using Minho as the stranger. He would watch from the balcony as Minho approached them in the lobby of their building. The girls would immediately scan the room, find a member of the building staff or a resident they knew, and launch into a scripted plea for help. It was a drill in emotional manipulation and situational awareness. He was teaching them that their voices were weapons as powerful as any gun, and that the dragon wasn't just a man. It was a mantle they could bestow upon anyone they chose to trust. The memory of their training was bittersweet. Every time they succeeded in a game, Jun Huk felt a piece of his heart harden. He was stealing their childhood to give them a future. He was filling their heads with tactical maneuvers instead of fairy tales. Amara had caught them once, practicing the escape the knot game in the living room, where Jun Huk showed them how to use a hidden shim to pick a basic plastic zip tie. Jun Huk, what on earth are you doing? She had asked, her voice hovering between amusement and concern. They're 7. Why are you teaching them how to get out of handcuffs? Jun Huk had looked up, his face a perfect mask of casual playfulness. It's a magic trick, Amara. The girls wanted to learn how to be like Harry Houdini. It's good for their finger dexterity. Amara had laughed and shaken her head, returning to her book. But Jun Huk had seen the way Zion looked at him in that moment. It was a look of profound, silent understanding. The girls knew. On some primal level, they understood that their father wasn't just a businessman. They understood that the games weren't just games. They were a blood oath. They were the preparation for a day Jun Huk hoped would never come, but one he knew was inevitable. That day had come at the textile mill. As he drove through the lightning streets of Seoul, Jun Huk realized that the only reason Zion had been able to keep her composure in the back of the van was because of the ghost game. The only reason they had been able to signal him was because of the magic spark in their pendants. They hadn't survived because of luck. They had survived because their father was a monster who had spent 6 months turning his home into a training camp. The weight of this realization pressed down on him. He had saved them, but at what cost? He looked at the twins in the back seat. They were safe, but they would never look at a dark room or a stranger the same way again. The golden cage had been breached, but the birds inside had learned how to sharpen their beaks. He pulled the SUV into the private underground garage of the penthouse, the reinforced steel doors closing behind them with a heavy, final thud. The shadow cabinet had already secured the building. Min-ho was waiting at the elevator, his face a grim mask of relief. "The perimeter is at maximum, sir," Min-ho reported as the doors opened. "Madame Gao's remaining cells are being systematically dismantled. But Amara, she's been waiting in the foyer. She's seen the news of the docks." Jun Huk nodded, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. This was the moment he dreaded more than the fight at the mill. He had to face the woman he loved and explain why her daughters knew how to hide from assassins. He had to explain why his business associates were men with scarred faces and silenced weapons. He climbed into the back seat and gently woke the girls. "We're home, my stars. The game is over. You won." Zara blinked, rubbing her eyes, her lace dress tattered and gray. "Did we do good, Appa? Did we follow the rules of the ghost game?" "You were perfect," Jun Huk whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion he couldn't suppress. "You were the best ghosts I've ever seen." He carried them into the elevator, the quiet luxury of the building a jarring contrast to the rusted iron and blood of the textile mill. When the doors opened into the penthouse, Amara was there. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a single night. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands shaking as she grabbed the girls from Jun Huk's arms, sobbing into their necks. Jun Huk stood back, watching the reunion. He felt like an intruder in his own home. He watched as Amara checked them for injuries, her hands fluttering over their faces and arms. And then, she looked at him. The silence that followed was louder than the gunfire at the docks. She saw the tactical vest he hadn't yet removed. She saw the dried blood on his knuckles. She saw the cold, mechanical light still lingering in his amber eyes. She saw the dragon standing where her husband used to be. "They told me what happened," she said, her voice a hollow whisper. "The police. They said a man on a motorcycle took out 30 professional mercenaries in the dark. They said the city was locked down by an invisible force. Jun Huk, Zion told me about the magic spark. She told me about the ghost game. What have you done to them?" Jun Huk took a step forward, but the look in Amara's eyes stopped him. It wasn't just fear. It was betrayal. "I kept them alive, Amara. Everything I did, the games, the training, the shadow cabinet, it was all to make sure that when the past came for them, they wouldn't be victims. I taught them how to survive in a world that doesn't care about their innocence." "You turned them into soldiers," she cried, pulling the twins closer to her. "They're children, Jun Huk. They were supposed to be safe here. You promised me this life was over." "The life is never over." Jun Huk's voice rose, the dragon's roar finally breaking through the businessman's mask. "Men like me don't get to retire, Amara. We just wait for the next war. I tried to give you the lie. I tried to give you the golden cage. But Gao proved that the only thing that protects a family in this city isn't a lawyer or a suit. It's the fire. And I will burn every soul in Seoul before I let that fire touch them." The twins watched them, their eyes wide and knowing. Zion reached out and touched Amara's arm. "Mama, don't be mad. Appa was playing the butterfly hunt with the bad men. He won. He always wins." Amara looked down at her daughter, the horror of the realization sinking in. Her children didn't see the violence as a tragedy. They saw it as a game they had been trained to play. She looked back at Jun Huk, and for the first time, she saw the true depth of the sacrifice he had made. He hadn't just protected them. He had prepared them to live in his world. He had given them the tools to survive the dark. But in doing so, he had invited the dark into their hearts. "Go to your room, girls," Amara said softly, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Mama needs to talk to Appa." The twins obeyed, walking down the hallway with a disciplined, quiet gait that chilled Amara to the bone. When they were gone, she turned back to Jun Huk. "Who are you? Truly?" Jun Huk looked at her, his amber eyes finally fading back into the deep, tired brown of a man who had seen too much. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the dragon pendant, the silver glinting in the morning light. "I am the man who loves you," he said, "and I am the dragon who protects you. I never wanted those two things to be the same, but the world didn't give me a choice." He walked toward the balcony, looking out over the city as the sun finally climbed above the horizon. The Iron Lotus was broken, Madame Gao was in chains, and his daughters were safe in their beds. He had won the war, but as he felt the cold distance between him and Amara, he realized that the golden cage had finally shattered. He wasn't a businessman anymore. He was a king who had reclaimed his throne, but he was standing on a mountain of ash. "What happens now?" Amara asked from the doorway. Jun Huk didn't turn around. "Now we finish it. Gao is alive. She needs to understand that the dragon doesn't just bite. He erases." The shadow training was over. The games had become reality. And as Jun Huk prepared to face his oldest rival for the final time, he knew that the man who had traded his Glock for a school run was gone forever. The lion was no longer pretending, and the world was about to find out that the only thing more dangerous than a dragon with nothing to lose is a father with everything to protect. The silence of the penthouse was a physical weight, a thick, suffocating blanket that even the filtered air of the high-end ventilation system couldn't lift. Jun Huk stood in his study, the room bathed in the bruised purple light of a soul twilight. On the mahogany desk lay the physical evidence of his night of war, the matte black Glock, the silver dragon pendant, and a blood-stained burner phone recovered from the textile mill. He had saved his daughters, but the air in the house had changed. The trust that had been the foundation of his 6-month masquerade as a normal man was cracked, and as he stared at the encrypted data scrolling across his monitor, he realized the crack went much deeper than he ever imagined. He had assumed Madame Gao was a ghost from his past seeking relevance. He had assumed the Iron Lotus was simply a rival syndicate testing the fences of a retired predator. But as the shadow cabinet peeled back the layers of the kidnapping's logistics, a terrifying pattern began to emerge. The breach in the garage, the timing of the recital, the specific knowledge of the girl's ghost game training. It wasn't just professional. It was intimate. It was a betrayal of the blood. A soft chime sounded at his door. Minho entered, his face ashen, holding a tablet that contained the final decrypted logs from Gao's personal server. "Sir," Minho whispered, his voice cracking for the first time in 10 years. "We found the source of the financial transfers that funded the Iron Lotus's move into Seoul. The accounts aren't coming from the outside. They're coming from within the Kong family holdings." Jun Huk didn't move. He didn't blink. He felt a cold, familiar stone settle in the pit of his stomach. He reached for the tablet, his amber eyes scanning the ledger. The names were buried under 12 layers of shell companies, but the routing codes were unmistakable. They were the codes of the White Dragon accounts, the secondary branch of his empire that he had gifted to his younger brother, Kong Tae-hoon, when he decided to go ghost. The blood debt wasn't a metaphor. It was a ledger. Tae-hoon, the brother he had protected, the man he had groomed to be the legitimate face of the family while he did the dirty work in the trenches, had sold out his own nieces to lure Jun Huk back into the fire. Tae-hoon didn't want the dragon to be a businessman. He wanted the dragon to be a corpse, so he could claim the throne that Jun Huk had abdicated but never truly surrendered. "Tae-hoon," Jun Huk whispered, the name tasting like poison. He remembered the day he had left the syndicate. Tae-hoon had stood on the docks, his eyes full of a strange, hungry light as he watched Jun Huk hand over the signet ring. Asterisk, you're leaving us for a woman and 2 bastards? Asterisk Tae-hoon had asked, his voice dripping with a resentment that Jun Huk had mistaken for grief. Asterisk, the dragon doesn't play house, brother. You'll be back. Or I'll make sure you have nowhere else to go. Asterisk. Jun Huk had laughed it off then, believing that blood was thicker than the ink of a syndicate contract. He had been a fool. He had spent 20 years teaching the world to fear the dragon, but he had forgotten to teach his own brother the most important lesson of all. Never mistake a lion's restraint for his death. Where is he? Jun Huk asked, his voice dropping into that low, mechanical register that signaled the end of diplomacy. He's at the Sapphire Lounge, Min-ho replied. Celebrating. He believes the Iron Lotus succeeded in the exchange. He doesn't know you breached the mill. He thinks the girls are still in Gao's custody and that you are currently signing over the Incheon deeds. Jun Huk stood up, the chair scraping against the hardwood like a scream. He didn't put on the navy suit jacket. He didn't put on the cashmere sweater. He reached into the safe and pulled out a heavy, dark overcoat, the one he had worn during the year of the Red Docks, a time when the name Kong Jun Huk was synonymous with the end of days. He checked the magazine of his weapon, the metallic click sounding final and absolute in the quiet room. I'm going alone, Jun Huk commanded as he walked toward the elevator. Sir, it's a trap, Min-ho protested, stepping into his path. The Sapphire is crawling with Tae-hoon's personal guard. They aren't shadow cabinet. They're loyal to him. Jun Huk looked at Min-ho, and for a second, the amber in his eyes was so bright it seemed to illuminate the hallway. They aren't loyal to him, Min-ho. They're afraid of him. And tonight, I'm going to show them what real fear looks like. A brother who sells his family for a throne isn't a king. He's a parasite. And I'm the cure. As the elevator descended, Jun Huk felt the last of his businessman life falling away like old skin. He thought of the twins, sleeping upstairs in their beds, unaware that the man who had ordered their kidnapping was the same man they called Uncle Tae. He thought of Amara's face when she realized the betrayal came from inside their own bloodline. The golden cage wasn't just broken. It was burnt to the ground. There was no going back to school runs and piano practice. Not after this. The Sapphire Lounge was a palace of glass and neon perched on the edge of the Han River, a place where the elite of the underworld came to wash their money in champagne. Jun Huk rode his motorcycle through the front gates, the guards barely having time to register the roar of the engine before he was through. He didn't hide. He didn't use the back entrance. He walked through the front doors, the heavy glass swinging open as the doorman froze, their hands hovering over their holsters. They recognized the coat. They recognized the walk. They recognized the dragon had come home. He moved through the crowded club like a shark through a school of colorful fish. The music was a pounding, rhythmic thrum, the lights a dizzying mosaic of blue and gold. People parted before him instinctively, sensing the radiation of violence that hummed off his skin. He reached the VIP elevator, where 2 of Tae-hoon's personal cleaners stood guard. They were young, arrogant, wearing suits that cost more than their lives. The boss is busy, Ghost, one of them said, stepping forward, his hand reaching for the bulge in his jacket. You should have stayed in the suburbs. Jun Huk didn't waste breath on words. He caught the man's throat with a speed that defied human reaction, his fingers digging into the carotid artery. With his other hand, he grabbed the second guard's wrist, snapping it upward until the bone tore through the silk of his sleeve. It was a symphony of professional brutality that lasted less than 3 seconds. He stepped over their gasping bodies and entered the elevator. The top floor was a private sanctuary of marble and silence. Tae-hoon was sitting at a massive desk, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand. Looking out over the city, he thought he had won. He looked like a younger, softer version of Jun Huk, his hair perfectly coiffed, his eyes full of a shallow, brittle ambition. When the elevator doors opened, he didn't even turn around. Did Gao send the confirmation? Tae-hoon asked, his voice smooth and oily. I want the girls moved to the Jeju estate. We need to keep them as leverage until the dragon signs over the last of the shipping lanes. I want my brother to watch everything he built turn to dust before I let him die. The dragon doesn't sign papers. Tae-hoon. Jun Huk's voice cut through the room like a frozen blade. He signs death warrants. Taehoon froze. The glass of scotch slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. He turned slowly, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost himself. He looked at Jun Huk, at the blood on his hands, the fire in his eyes, and the shadow of the monster he had tried to bury. "Brother?" Taehoon stammered, his hands shaking as he reached for the hidden alarm under his desk. I can explain. Gao, she forced my hand. She threatened my interests. I was trying to protect you. I was luring her out so we could finish her together. Jun Huk walked toward the desk, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. You lured her out by using my children as bait? You sold the girls I love to the woman who wants my head on a pike. You used the codes I gave you, the keys to the kingdom I built for you, to fund their kidnapping. It's just business, Jun Huk. Taehoon screamed, the panic finally breaking through his mask. You walked away. You left me with the scraps while you went off to play dad, in a penthouse. I did the work. I took the risks. The throne is mine by right of blood. Blood. Jun Huk leaned over the desk, his amber eyes burning into his brother's soul. You want to talk about blood? The blood in my veins is the same blood that's currently staining the floor of a textile mill because of you. The blood on my knuckles is the price I paid to get my daughters back. You aren't my brother, Taehoon. You're a debt, and I've come to collect. Taehoon lunged for a drawer, pulling out a small, gold-plated pistol, but Jun Huk was already there. He caught Taehoon's hand, crushing the bones of the fingers against the grip of the gun until the gold was stained red. He didn't fire his weapon. He didn't need to. He dragged Taehoon over the desk, the man's expensive suit tearing against the marble, and slammed him against the glass window overlooking the river. Please! Taehoon sobbed, the arrogance gone, replaced by the pathetic whimpering of a man who had never faced a real wolf. We're family. You can't kill me. Think of what it would do to the legacy. Think of Mother. Mother would have drowned you in the Han if she knew what you did to those girls. Jun Huk whispered, his voice a low, terrifying growl. You thought I had grown soft. You thought a navy suit and a morning school run had turned the dragon into a sheep. You saw 2 children as my weakness, a way to lure me back into the shadows. What you didn't realize, Taehoon, is that you hadn't found my weakness. You had found my fuse, and I'm about to turn your whole world to ash. Jun Huk pulled a silver dragon signet ring from his pocket, the one he had given Taehoon 6 months ago. He forced it onto Taehoon's broken finger, the metal cutting into the skin. You wanted the throne? You can have it, but you're going to rule a kingdom of ghosts. He didn't throw his brother through the glass. He didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he signaled the shadow cabinet. In the darkness of the room, 6 men appeared from the shadows, their faces hidden by the same dark overcoats Jun Huk wore. These were the men who had once been loyal to Taehoon, but as they saw the dragon standing over his broken prey, they knew where the true power lay. Take him, Jun Huk commanded. Strip him of the accounts. Strip him of the name. He is to be taken to the Incheon docks and given to Madame Gao's surviving lieutenants. Tell them he is the one who betrayed the contract. Tell them he is the one who set them up to die. Let them decide what his life is worth. No! Jun Huk! No! Taehoon's screams echoed through the Sapphire Lounge as he was dragged away. You can't do this. I'm your brother. You're a monster. You're the monster Zion will grow to hate. Jun Huk stood alone in the office, the silence returning like a cold tide. He looked out at the city, the lights of Seoul flickering like a sea of diamonds. He felt no triumph. He felt no relief. He felt only the heavy, paralyzing weight of the blood debt. He had protected his daughters, but in doing so, he had confirmed Taehoon's dying accusation. He was a monster. He had used his own brother as a sacrifice to end a war. He walked back to the elevator, his steps slow and heavy. He thought of the twins, of the games he had taught them. He realized that the ghost game wasn't just for their protection. It was a reflection of the life he was forcing them to live. A life where even your own uncle was a predator. A life where trust was a fairy tale told to children who didn't know better. He returned to the penthouse as the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon. The shadow cabinet had already cleared the entrance. Minho was waiting in the lobby, his head bowed. "It's done, sir. The Incheon accounts have been recovered. Taehoon is no longer a factor." Jun Huk nodded, walking past him without a word. He entered the penthouse and found Amara sitting at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in her hands. She looked up at him, her eyes scanning his face, his coat, the darkness that still clung to him. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't ask where he had been. She saw the answer in the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice a hollow whisper. "The war with the Lotus is over," Jun Huk said, his voice sounding like it came from a great distance. "But the cost was more than I thought." "Taehoon?" she asked, the intuition of a mother hitting the mark. Jun Huk finally looked at her, and the amber in his eyes was gone, replaced by a profound, agonizing sadness. "He was the one who gave them the keys, Amara. He was the one who told them how to get past the security. He sold them the girls to get to me." Amara stood up, her hand going to her mouth as she gasped. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with a terrifying, cold clarity. "What did you do to him?" "I gave him what he wanted," Jun Huk said. "I gave him his kingdom." Amara walked over to him, her touch hesitant but firm as she took his hands. "Jun Huk, look at me. You saved our daughters. You did what you had to do. But you can't keep living like this. You can't be the dragon and Appa at the same time. The fire is going to consume all of us." "I know," Jun Huk whispered, pulling her into a desperate embrace. "I know. But as long as they are coming for my family, I have to be the fire. Because a lion is always a lion, Amara. And the world needs to know that my cubs are off limits." As they stood in the kitchen, the sun finally broke over the city, filling the room with a brilliant, blinding light. It was a beautiful morning, but for Kong Jun Huk, the light was just a reminder of the shadows he had to walk in to keep it. The blood debt was paid, but the ledger was far from balanced. He had saved his legacy, but he had lost his brother. He had secured his home, but he had lost his peace. The dragon was back on his throne, but the throne was made of ash. And as he heard the twins waking up in the next room, their laughter a silver bell in the morning air, he knew that the greatest battle was yet to come. He had to figure out how to be the man they loved while being the monster the world feared. He had to be a father, a protector, and a ghost all at once. The lion was no longer pretending. The world knew the dragon was awake. And as the city of Seoul began to stir, unaware of the war that had just ended in its shadows, Kong Jun Huk made a vow. He would burn the whole world to ash before he let his children learn what fear tasted like. But he also knew that the ash was already beginning to settle on his own heart. The rain over the Incheon district had turned from a rhythmic pulse into a suffocating shroud, a heavy, gray curtain that blurred the line between the sky and the black waters of the harbor. Kong Jun Huk stood on the pier, his dark overcoat snapping in the wind like the wings of a predatory bird. He was alone. He had sent the shadow cabinet back into the crevices of the city, and he had sent Minho to guard the perimeter of the penthouse with orders to shoot anyone who breathed the name Lotus. To the world, it looked like the dragon had finally run out of fire. To Madame Gao, watching through the long-range thermal lenses of her snipers, it looked like a broken father coming to beg for his life. But as Jun Huk felt the cold metal of the handcuffs snap around his wrists, his pulse didn't quicken. He didn't resist as the four men in slate-gray suits kicked his legs out from under him, forcing him to his knees in the salt-stained gravel. He didn't even flinch when the butt of a rifle caught him across the jaw, drawing a thin line of crimson that traced the path of his stubble. He was a man who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of the strike, yet here he was, allowing himself to be treated like common prey. The dragon looked smaller in the mud. One of the guards spat, his voice thick with a bravado that failed to mask the tremor in his hands. They knew who he was. They had heard the legends of the Red Docks. They had seen the security footage of the textile mill. They were touching a live wire and praying the insulation held. Jun Huk looked up, his amber eyes clouded by the rain but sharp with a terrifying, hidden clarity. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was practicing the ghost game on a level these men couldn't comprehend. He was slowing his heart, mapping the vibrations of the floorboards beneath him, and counting the footsteps of every guard in the radius of the warehouse. He wasn't a prisoner, he was a Trojan horse. He had realized that as long as he fought from the outside, Gao would keep moving the twins like chess pieces. To end this, he had to become the prize she couldn't refuse. He had to let her think she had won. They dragged him inside the belly of the old cannery, a space that smelled of rust, rotted fish, and the cold metallic scent of high-grade weaponry. The interior was a labyrinth of hanging chains and rusted machinery, the perfect sanctuary for a woman who lived in the shadows of the past. At the center of the room, beneath a single, flickering halogen light, sat Madame Gao. She was elegant in a way that was meant to be an insult to the filth around her, her silk qipao a sharp contrast to the industrial rot. Beside her, locked in a reinforced steel cage that looked like it had been salvaged from a zoo, were Zara and Zion. The sight of them hit Jun Huk harder than the rifle butt. They were huddled together, their lace dresses tattered, their faces pale in the harsh light. But when Zion saw him, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She remembered the lesson from the secret signal game. She saw his hands, bound behind his back, and she saw the way his thumb was tapping a rhythmic code against his own palm. Asterisk wait. Watch. The lion is here. Asterisk. I expected more of a struggle. Jun Huk, Gao said, her voice echoing through the hollow space. She walked toward him, the heels of her boots clicking like a countdown. She reached out and tilted his head back, her fingers cold against his skin. I expected the man who leveled the Sapphire Lounge to come here with an army. Instead, you come to me in chains, looking for a bargain. Has the father finally strangled the dragon? Jun Huk let out a low, raspy laugh that sounded like dry leaves skittering over stone. A bargain implies we both have something to lose. Gao, you've already lost. You just haven't looked at the ledger yet. Gao's eyes flashed with a sudden, sharp fury. She struck him, a backhand that cracked across his cheek, but Jun Huk didn't move. He absorbed the blow, his head snapping back, but his eyes never left hers. He was looking past her, calculating the distance to the cage, the weight of the padlock, and the trajectory of the 3 snipers positioned in the rafters. You think your shadow cabinet can save you? Gao hissed, leaning in until her breath was hot against his ear. I've mined the entrances. I've jammed the frequencies. You are in my world now. And in my world, the dragon is just a belt made of leather. She signaled to her men, and they hoisted Jun Huk up by the chains, suspending him from a meat hook so his toes barely touched the floor. It was a position of ultimate vulnerability, a physical humiliation designed to break the spirit before the body. But as the weight of his own frame pulled at his shoulders, Jun Huk felt a strange, cold peace. He had been here before. In the Siberian winters of their youth, he had spent days in similar positions, learning how to turn pain into a fuel source. Watch him, Gao commanded the twins, her voice cruel and high. Watch the man you called a hero. Watch as he begs for the very thing he thinks he's too good for. Zion looked at her father, her eyes reflecting the amber fire that was beginning to burn brighter in his. She didn't see a victim. She saw the floor is lava game being played on a grand scale. She saw the way his muscles were tensing in a specific, rhythmic pattern. The dragon's coil. He was loosening the pins in the handcuffs, using the very tension of the chains to provide the leverage he needed. Minutes turned into hours of psychological attrition. Gao paced the room, recounting the blood debt of the past, the way Jun Huk had abandoned the syndicate, and the way his brother had been the only one with the vision to stay. She spoke of the throne, the power, and the legacy. Jun Huk ignored it all. He was listening to the rain on the roof, using the sound to mask the subtle, metallic click of the first locking pin giving way. He's not breathing right, one of the guards muttered, stepping closer to Jun Huk. Look at his chest. It's too slow. He's meditating, Gao said with a dismissive wave. He's trying to find his center. Let him. It will only make it hurt more when I take it away. But Jun Huk wasn't meditating. He was activating the final phase of the infiltration. Deep within the lining of his overcoat was a localized EMP pulse, a one-time use device triggered by a specific sequence of muscle contractions in his forearm. He had waited for the moment when the guard with the keys was within 3 feet. He had waited for the moment when the snipers were rotating their shifts. "Gao," Jun Huk said, his voice suddenly loud and resonant, cutting through her monologue. "Do you know why a lion allows himself to be caged?" Gao stopped pacing, her brow furrowing. "To survive, I imagine." "No," Jun Huk said, a terrifying grin spreading across his face. "To see who is brave enough to step inside the bars." He triggered the pulse. The halogen light exploded in a shower of white sparks. The cannery plunged into a darkness so thick it felt like water. The electronic locks on the cage hissed as their circuits fried, the heavy steel door swinging open an inch. The sniper's thermal goggles flared white, blinding them instantly. In the dark, the lion roared. The sound of the handcuffs hitting the floor was followed by the wet thud of the first guard's collapse. Jun Huk didn't need light. He had memorized the room in the hours he spent hanging from the hook. He moved with a predatory grace that was entirely silent, a ghost in the machine of the lotus. He reached the guard with the keys in 2 strides, his hand finding the man's throat and crushing the windpipe before a single word of alarm could be raised. "Appa!" Zion's voice was a whisper, but it was full of a fierce, sudden hope. "Stay in the cage," Jun Huk commanded, his voice appearing from a different part of the room every time he spoke. "Count to 50. Don't open your eyes until the air smells like ozone." He moved through the guards like a scythe. He didn't use a gun, he was the weapon. He used the chains that had bound him as a flail, the heavy steel links shattering bone and tearing flesh. He was a whirlwind of amber-eyed destruction, a man who had shed the navy suit and the businessman mask to reveal the monster that had been waiting for its turn. Gao was screaming for lights, for order, for the snipers to fire, but there was no order to be found. Her men were dying in the dark, taken out by a force they couldn't see and a man they couldn't stop. She fumbled for her own weapon, a small, ivory-handled pistol, but a hand clamped over hers with the strength of a hydraulic press. "The dragon doesn't beg, Gao," Jun Huk whispered into her ear, his voice a low, terrifying vibration. "And the lion doesn't negotiate with the things that touch his cubs." He didn't kill her. Not yet. He disarmed her with a brutal twist of the wrist and threw her across the room, toward the center where the emergency red lights were beginning to flicker to life. The dim, crimson glow revealed a scene of absolute carnage. 12 men lay broken on the floor. The snipers in the rafters were silent, their rifles discarded. Jun Huk stood in the center of the room, his overcoat gone, his shirt torn to reveal the dragon ink that seemed to writhe in the red light. He walked toward the cage, his movements slow and deliberate. He pulled the door open and reached inside, scooping Zara and Zion into his arms. They clung to him, their small hands burying into his neck, their tears hot against his skin. "Is the game over?" Zara sobbed. "The game is over," Jun Huk whispered, his voice returning to the gentle Appa they knew. "But the dragon still has one more thing to do." He turned back to Gao, who was crawling toward the exit, her silk dress stained with the grime of the cannery floor. He didn't chase her. He simply watched her, his amber eyes glowing with a cold, final judgment. "You thought the suit made me soft," Jun Huk said, his voice echoing through the ruins of her syndicate. "You thought the school runs and the piano lessons were a sign of decay. You didn't realize they were a sanctuary. They were the only thing keeping the monster in the dark. And tonight you turned off the lights." He walked out of the cannery, the twins held tight against his chest, leaving Gao alone in the red-lit tomb of her ambition. He didn't need to finish her. The shadow cabinet was waiting outside. They would ensure that the Iron Lotus was erased from the history of Seoul, not with a bang, but with a clinical, systematic silence. As he reached the pier, the rain began to clear, a sliver of moonlight breaking through the clouds. Minho was waiting with the armored SUV, his face a mask of profound relief. He took the girls from Jun Huk's arms, wrapping them in warm blankets and ushering them into the safety of the vehicle. Jun Huk stayed on the pier for a moment, looking out over the water. He felt the weight of the night pressing down on him, the realization that the golden cage could never be rebuilt. He had saved them, but he had shown them the monster. He had allowed himself to be chained, only to prove that no chain could hold a father's wrath. He climbed into the driver's seat and looked at the twins in the rearview mirror. They were already drifting off to sleep, their small bodies finally succumbing to the exhaustion of the night. He looked at his own reflection, the blood on his face, the amber in his eyes, the man who was no longer pretending to be a businessman. "We're going home," he whispered to the silence of the car. But as he drove toward the city, the lights of Seoul shimmering in the distance, Jun Huk knew that home would never be the same. He had protected the light by becoming the dark. He had shown his daughters that a lion is always a lion, even in chains. But he also knew that the hardest part of the story wasn't the fighting. It was the living. He had to figure out how to be the man who read them stories and the man who broke the world, all at the same time. The dragon was back. The lotus was ash. And as the sun began to rise over the Incheon harbor, Jun Huk drove into the light, a father who had finally realized that his strength wasn't in his fists, but in the two little girls sleeping in the back seat. He had won the war, but the greatest challenge of his life was just beginning. The challenge of being a hero to the people who knew exactly what kind of monster he could be. The heavy iron door of the cannery office groaned as it settled into its frame, locking with a finality that felt like the closing of a tomb. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and the metallic tang of old machinery. Zara and Zion sat huddled on a crate, their white lace dresses now a map of gray smudges and jagged tears. To any of the Iron Lotus sentries guarding the perimeter, they looked like broken dolls, discarded and defeated. But beneath the surface of their terror, a clock was ticking, a rhythmic, mechanical count that had been drilled into their subconscious during those sun-drenched afternoons in the penthouse. They weren't just waiting to be rescued. They were playing the game. "Ghost breathing," Zion whispered, her voice so low it was barely a vibration against the damp air. Zara nodded, her chest rising and falling in the slow, controlled pattern Jun Huk had taught them during their hide-and-seek sessions. It was the technique used to lower the heart rate and sharpen the senses. As their breathing synced, the world around them seemed to expand. They could hear the hum of the electronic equipment in the corner of the office, the rhythmic drip of a leaky pipe, and the muffled, arrogant laughter of the guards in the hallway. Zara's eyes moved to the corner of the room, where a stack of tactical radios and a laptop sat on a makeshift desk. The Iron Lotus was a modern syndicate, relying on a sophisticated, encrypted mesh network to coordinate their movements across the Incheon docks. To them, the technology was their greatest strength, their eyes and ears in the dark. To Jun Huk's daughters, it was the silver butterfly they had been trained to pin down. "The eyes of the dragon," Zara murmured, recalling the puzzle game Jun Huk had played with them using old computer motherboards and circuit sets. He had taught them that every machine has a heart, and if you touch the heart the right way, the machine goes to sleep. They didn't move immediately. They waited for the guard to finish his rounds. They counted the seconds between his footsteps, just as they had practiced during the sound map game. *1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Turn. *. The moment the footsteps receded toward the far end of the cannery, Zion slipped off the crate. She moved with a silent, fluid grace. The floor is lava technique. Her feet touched the concrete with the precision of a cat, avoiding the debris that might crunch or clatter. Zara followed, her eyes fixed on the door. Her job was the perimeter watch. She stood by the frosted glass pane, her shadow melting into the darkness of the wall. She watched for the silhouette of the guard, her hand hovering over her dragon pendant, ready to signal the red light if he returned too soon. Zion reached the desk. The laptop was open, its screen casting a cold blue light over her pale face. In the center of the display was a tactical map of the docks, showing the heat signatures of the guards and the approaching threat, their father. She saw the blip that represented Jun Huk, a solitary light moving toward the heart of the storm. She felt a surge of pride that momentarily pushed back the cold grip of fear. Her Appa was coming, and he was the monster the bad men were afraid of. She reached for the tactical radios. These were the primary links between the snipers in the rafters and the ground teams. Jun Huk had taught them a magic trick involving frequencies. He had shown them how to use a simple paperclip or a piece of wire to cross-connect the internal terminals of a handheld unit, creating a feedback loop that would flood the entire channel with white noise. Zion looked around the desk, her small fingers searching through a jar of stationery. She found a heavy-duty staple and a small pair of silver scissors used for trimming cigar tips. It was the MacGyver game, a test of resourcefulness Jun Huk had disguised as a rainy-day craft activity. "Hurry!" Zara whispered from the door. "The shadow is coming back." Zion didn't panic. Panic was for the sheep. She was a dragon. She used the scissors to pry open the battery casing of the lead radio. Her hands were steady, her focus absolute. She remembered the diagram Jun Huk had drawn on the chalkboard in the playroom. Asterisk, connect the red to the gold. Make the sparks dance. Asterisk. She bent the staple into a U-shape and jammed it into the circuit board, bridging the transmission relay. A tiny, almost invisible spark jumped from the board, and the radio's light began to flicker a frantic, erratic red. She didn't stop there. She grabbed the laptop's mouse and began to navigate the syndicate's comms software. It was a simplified version of the navigation game they played on their tablets. Only instead of finding hidden stars, she was looking for the mute button for the entire network. She found the command console. Jun Huk had taught her the basic keystrokes, the secret language of the keyboard. Control-Alt-Shift-Delete. The menu for the network administrator popped up. It required a password. Zion stared at the screen. She didn't know the password, but she knew her father's philosophy. People are the weakest link. She looked at the desk. Beside the laptop was a framed photograph of a young woman, Madame Gao, and a small, handwritten note with a date. 06-12-88. She typed the numbers in. Access granted. A thrill of victory raced through her. She was inside the silver butterfly's mind. She didn't delete the files. She did something much more effective, the echo trick. She rerouted all incoming audio from the snipers to a 5-second delay and overlaid it with a recording of the building's own ambient noise. To the guards, the silence would feel normal, but they would be 5 seconds behind reality. In a fight involving Jun Huk, 5 seconds was an eternity. "Done!" Zion whispered, clicking the final confirmation. "Go! Go! Go!" Zara signaled, her voice urgent. The shadow of the guard was looming large against the frosted glass. The twins scrambled back to their crate, moving with the practiced invisibility of the ghost game. They tucked their feet under their dresses and bowed their heads, returning to the persona of the helpless, terrified children. When the door swung open, the guard stepped in, his flashlight sweeping the room. He saw 2 small girls huddled in the dark, shivering in the cold. He sneered, satisfied that the merchandise was still secure, and turned back to his radio. "Sector 4 clear," the guard said into his shoulder mic. In the rafters, the sniper heard the message, but because of Zion's echo trick, the sound was distorted, a hollow, ghostly repetition that made him frown and tap his headset. The network was beginning to bleed static. The communication lines were fraying, the dragon's daughters having cut the threads from the inside. Outside, the storm was reaching its crescendo. Jun Huk was moving through the shadows of the pier, his movements a blur of lethal efficiency. He knew the moment the comms went down. He could hear the confusion in the guards' voices as they struggled to coordinate. He didn't know how it had happened, but he knew the games were being played. He felt a fierce, burning pride. His stars were shining in the dark. Inside the office, Zara and Zion watched the chaos unfold through the narrow gap in the door. They saw the guards' faces change from arrogance to confusion, then to a mounting, palpable dread. The radios were now emitting a low-frequency hum that made the men irritable and distracted. The magic spark had worked. "Appa is in the building," Zion whispered, her eyes tracking a shadow that moved with a speed no human should possess. The Iron Lotus was a machine that relied on its parts working in perfect unison. By sabotaging the comms, the twins had turned that machine into a pile of disjointed scrap. When the first guard fell in the hallway, his cry for help was swallowed by the white noise Zion had injected into the system. When the second guard tried to alert the snipers, he only heard his own voice echoing back at him. 5 seconds too late. Jun Huk breached the office door just as the final guard was turning to use the twins as a human shield. The man never even got his hand on his holster. Jun Huk was a whirlwind of amber-eyed fury. His movements so fast they seemed to bypass the laws of physics. He caught the guard's arm, twisted it until the bone splintered, and drove him into the concrete floor with a force that cracked the foundation. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the ragged breathing of the dragon. Jun Huk stood over the fallen man, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the room for threats. Then he saw them. Zara and Zion were standing by the desk, the radio with the bent staple still in Zion's hand. They weren't crying. They were standing tall, their eyes bright with the thrill of the win. "We caught the silver butterfly, Appa," Zion said, her voice clear and proud. Jun Huk dropped his weapon, his knees hitting the floor as he pulled them both into a crushing embrace. He didn't care about the syndicate, the Incheon docks, or the war that was still raging outside. He only cared about the two small hearts beating against his chest. He felt a sob rise in his throat, a mixture of relief, love, and a profound, agonizing guilt. He had taught them how to be monsters to survive, and they had exceeded his wildest expectations. "You were perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You played the games better than I ever did." He picked them up, carrying them through the wreckage of the cannery. As they walked past the bodies of the Iron Lotus, the twins didn't look away. They didn't have to. They had seen the Shadow Men, and they had beaten them. They had sabotaged the giants from the inside. As they reached the exit, the rain began to subside, the first light of dawn painting the horizon in shades of bruised purple and gold. Min-ho was waiting with the SUV, his face a map of exhaustion and relief. He took the girls, but as he did, he noticed the radio in Zion's hand. He looked at the bent staple, then at Jun Huk, his eyes widening in realization. "They did this?" Min-ho asked, his voice full of awe. "They are Kongs," Jun Huk said, his voice returning to the steady, iron tone of the dragon. "The world should have known better than to lock them in a room with a laptop and a staple." The ride back to the city was quiet. The twins fell asleep almost instantly, their heads resting on each other's shoulders. Jun Huk watched them in the mirror, the amber in his eyes slowly fading back to brown. He thought about the golden cage and the ghost game. He realized that he could never give them a truly normal life. The world was too dangerous, and the blood in their veins was too hot. But as he looked at the city of Seoul rising out of the mist, he knew that they didn't need a cage. They were dragons in training. He would still take them to school runs, he would still attend their piano recitals, and he would still read them bedtime stories. But he would also keep teaching them the games. He would show them how to find the blind spots, how to hear the silence, and how to turn a staple into a weapon. The Great Escape was over, but the story of the Kong family was just beginning. They had shown the Iron Lotus that a lion is always a lion, but they had also shown the world that the lion's cubs were just as dangerous. Kong Jun Huk was no longer just a protector. He was a mentor to a new generation of shadows. As the SUV pulled into the penthouse garage, Jun Huk felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had saved his children not just by fighting for them, but by giving them the tools to fight for themselves. He had turned his weakness into his greatest strength. The dragon was home, the fire was quiet, and as he carried his sleeping daughters into the elevator, Jun Huk made one final promise to the silence of the morning. He would burn the whole world to ash if he had to, but he would make sure his daughters were the ones holding the matches. The skyline of Seoul was a jagged edge of glass and neon, cutting through the morning mist like the teeth of a predator. For Kong Jun Huk, the city no longer looked like a map of investment opportunities or a playground for the elite. It looked like a battlefield that had finally been cleared. He stood on the rooftop of the Sapphire Lounge, the wind whipping his dark overcoat around his legs. His eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was struggling to pierce the gray shroud of the Incheon fog. The blood debt had been settled, and the Great Escape was complete, but the air still tasted of ozone and betrayal. Behind him, the lounge was a tomb of silence. The music had stopped, the champagne had gone flat, and the men who had once bowed to his brother, Tae-hoon, were now ghosts fading into the shadows. The transition of power had been clinical. Jun Huk hadn't needed to fire a single shot to dismantle his brother's operation. He had simply walked into the server rooms with the shadow cabinet and reclaimed the digital keys he had gifted to a traitor. He had watched as Taehoon's empire, built on the stolen momentum of the dragon, collapsed in a series of deleted files and frozen bank accounts. Jun Huk looked down at his hands. They were steady, but the skin was stained with the residue of a life he had tried to leave behind. For 6 months, he had been haunted by a binary choice. He was either the dragon, a monster who thrived in the dark, or he was Appa, a father who lived in the light. He had believed that the two identities could not occupy the same skin, that the monster would eventually devour the father, or the father would make the monster weak. But as he watched the sunrise, a new clarity settled over him, cold and absolute. He wasn't a monster, and he wasn't just a father. He was a protector. The realization didn't come with a surge of warmth. It came with the weight of iron. A monster kills for the sake of the kill, and a father loves for the sake of the love. A protector, however, bridges the gap. He uses the darkness to guard the light. He becomes the storm so his family can live in the calm. He understood now that his shadow training with the twins hadn't been an act of corruption. It had been an act of ultimate devotion. He had given them the tools to survive because he knew that his love alone wasn't a shield, it was a target. "Sir," Minho's voice broke the silence. The head of security stood by the roof access door, his tactical gear replaced by the familiar charcoal suit. "The final transfer is complete. Taehoon's associates have been blacklisted from every port in Asia. The Iron Lotus assets have been absorbed into the Kong Foundation. The golden cage is no longer a cage, sir. It's a fortress." Jun Huk turned, his amber eyes catching the first rays of the sun. "And Madame Gao?" "She was found at the pier," Minho replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "She didn't resist. She knew the game was over the moment the comms went dark. The shadow cabinet has handled her according to the protocols of the old code. She will not be returning to Seoul." Jun Huk nodded. There was no joy in the news, only a sense of professional closure. He walked toward the edge of the roof, looking down at the streets far below. He thought of the twins, Zara and Zion, who were currently at home with Amara, safe in their beds. He thought of the way Zion had held the modified radio in the cannery, the way she had looked at him not with fear, but with the recognition of a peer. He realized then that he had succeeded in the one mission that mattered. He hadn't just saved their lives, he had saved their spirits. By teaching them the games, he had stripped away the power of fear. They weren't victims of a kidnapping. They were participants in a victory. He had given them a sense of agency in a world that sought to make them pawns. "We aren't going back to the way it was, Minho," Jun Huk said, his voice a low, resonant vibration. "The businessman mask was a mistake. It made us look like prey. From now on, the world sees the dragon. Not the killer, not the hitman, but the guardian. We operate in the light, but we keep our teeth sharp." He left the rooftop and descended into the heart of the city. As he drove the armored SUV back toward the penthouse, he didn't feel the need to hide his movements. He drove through the center of Gangnam, his presence a silent declaration of sovereignty. He was no longer a ghost. He was a king reclaiming his territory. When he entered the penthouse, the atmosphere had shifted. The tension of the previous night had been replaced by a quiet, domestic gravity. Amara was in the kitchen, making tea, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his face for the monster she had seen at the docks. She found it, but she also found something else. A man who had finally made peace with his own nature. "You're back," she said, her voice steady. "It's finished," Jun Huk replied. He walked over to her, taking the teapot from her shaking hands and setting it on the counter. He took her hands in his thumbs tracing the line of her knuckles. "Taehoon is gone. The lotus is ash. There is no one left to look for us, Amara." "But you're still him," she whispered, looking at the dragon ink peeking out from beneath his sleeve. "The man who did those things at the mill. He's still inside you." "He is," Jun Huk admitted, his gaze unwavering. "And he always will be. But he is the reason our daughters are in the next room." He is the reason you can sleep tonight. I tried to hide him because I thought he would scare you. But the truth is, he is the only thing that keeps the world from scaring us. Amara leaned into him, her forehead resting against his chest. She didn't argue. She had seen the girls playing the butterfly hunt in the living room earlier that morning, their laughter ringing out as they spotted Minho's security teams on the monitors. She realized that Jun Huk hadn't broken them. He had forged them. I don't want to live in fear, Jun Huk, she said. Then don't, he promised. The dragon doesn't live in fear. He creates it for those who deserve it. We aren't hiding anymore. We are building a legacy that no one will dare to touch. He walked down the hallway to the twins' room. He pushed the door open softly. Zara and Zion were sitting on the floor, surrounded by their games, circuit boards, maps, and the silver dragon pendants. They looked up as he entered, their faces lighting up with a radiance that made the morning sun seem dim. Appa! They cried in unison, scrambling to their feet and throwing themselves at him. Jun Huk knelt, catching them both in a massive embrace. He felt the weight of them, the warmth of their skin, the reality of their existence. He looked at Zion, who was holding the silver staple she had used to sabotage the lotus. Is the final reign beginning, Appa? Zion asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Jun Huk smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Yes, little star, the final reign has begun. But in this kingdom, there are no cages, only horizons. He spent the rest of the day with them, not as a businessman pretending to be a father, but as a protector fully present in his role. They played the navigation game on the rooftop garden, but this time he showed them how the city's infrastructure actually worked. He taught them about the shadow cabinet and the people who worked in the dark to keep the city moving. He spoke to them not as children to be shielded, but as heirs to be prepared. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jun Huk stood on the balcony with Amara. The city was glowing below them, a sea of a million lights. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a ghost or a monster. He felt like a man who had finally found his purpose. He pulled a small, black velvet box from his pocket and handed it to Amara. Inside was a ring, not a signet ring of power, but a band of platinum set with a single, flawless amber diamond. A new beginning, he said. No more lies, no more cages, just us. Amara took the ring, her eyes filling with tears as she looked from the jewel to the man who had burned the world to give it to her. A protector, she whispered, the word a soft prayer in the wind. Always, Jun Huk replied. The story of the dragon had changed. It was no longer a tale of a killer seeking redemption or a father seeking an escape. It was the story of a man who realized that his greatest weapon was his love, and his greatest strength was his willingness to use his darkness to preserve the light. As the stars began to emerge over Seoul, Jun Huk looked out at his kingdom. He knew that there would be other threats, other lotus flowers seeking to bloom in the cracks of his empire. But he wasn't worried. He looked back into the penthouse, where Zara and Zion were practicing their ghost breathing before bed, their faces calm and confident. He was the dragon. He was the father. He was the protector. And as long as he breathed, the world would know that a lion is always a lion, and his pride would never fall. The final reign had begun, and for the first time in 8 years, Jun Huk was finally at peace with the fire inside him. He didn't have to choose. He was everything his family needed him to be, and that was more than enough. The world would learn fear, but his children would only ever know the taste of victory. I'm honestly blown away by the support on this series. Thank you all for being part of this journey. For those of you who are new or haven't said hi yet, comment below with your city or country. I'm reading every single one, and if you want to support more stories like this, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more of these characters.